about how the first 4 months of a professional job is where engineers figure out that everything that they learned in school essentially is totally useless for actually doing the job that they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I was talking to I forget who I was talking to today, or I was emailing, I guess, about someone asked what my opinions were about like sending one of their employees to like a motivational speaker or something. Of course, Beth Ann knows me the best probably out of JC, of course, but um, the big thing, of course, I ranted about that stuff for a while, but the takeaway was I always question how much benefit that these seminars actually give, students, particularly younger students, ones that don't have the experience you guys do. Um, and like in an 8 to 16 hour seminar, which this is much more than that, obviously, but in an 8 to 16 hour seminar that you typically give and you get a certificate from a university, things like that, like in powertrain, or you guys have all done them through other, I'm sure, seen them through other things. The question is, do we actually give you a proficiency? Like, is it actually like what we teach and impart? Does it really do anything for you? And I've always struggled with that because I don't really feel like it does. The only thing it probably gives you, and it's arguably even this gives you, is basically the words to go Google and start to develop that proficiency, right? That's why I never like to give anything less than what we're doing now, which is really extremely intensive, as you guys know. But like where we actually do something, and you can feel more than just like, oh, I know these words that I can Google now, or be a little bit dangerous when I'm in a meeting and talk the words, right? Because that's really all you get from a lot of these things. So that's what I kind of strive to do through the curriculum that's developed through these types of things is actually getting to a point. Not you guys are gonna be masters at something like this, but to actually get you to proficiency. And it kind of goes to what we were just talking about with undergraduates, senior and undergraduates. When they get out, the biggest employer frustration to all universities, and Beth Ann knows this, I know this, anyone who's worked at a university in education knows this, that the employer always complains, why do you not educate anyone, right? Why do you always give us them and they're completely useless? I mean, you guys have all worked with interns, right? You know that. And of course, the rebuttal to that from an faculty education standpoint is, well, we teach them how to think, right? We teach them how to learn. And it's like it's now your responsibility to actually teach them how to do anything. It's like, well, why did they just pay all this money and just waste 4 years? I'd have done this without that, right? So I mean, there's all this frustrations going back and forth between the two, and I think we have yet to find the right answer. So I think even with COVID, we're now starting to shift back towards a focus on tech schools, shorter certificate programs, things like that, which I tend to be supportive of generally. I also don't think you can necessarily replace the college experience either. I mean, there's a significant amount of learning that happens. And of course, graduate school is an amazing thing, but it also assumes that graduate school, you have, a sufficient amount of experience on how to actually learn. So you actually learn how to do something in grad school. Sometimes not. So I think it really just depends on your advisor too. So I mean, it all comes down to that. But that's what I try to do, at least in these things, is to get you to a point where you feel a little bit more than just, what word do I know to Google to figure some out, or how can I sound smart in a meeting when people are talking about this who know about it. It's more of, hey, I could actually sit down and with a little extra effort actually do something. So if you get out of this and you feel like then I've done my job. Otherwise, then well, oh well, we all lose. Go Google. All right, now that I've gotten on my soapbox on that one, any specific pointed questions? We did deployment last week. I'm sure there's some questions about that. It's a pretty cool one. How many of you guys like that more so than the other stuff that we've done? A rave? You got you guys into that? Yeah. Everyone. Yeah, I mean that's like I said, most engineers tend to gravitate towards that first because of the real systems oriented things, and it doesn't take you saw it. There's no code. In fact, in theory, you could have a software engineer give you all that stuff, right? And you could probably put it to work as long as you knew how to configure the tools appropriately. So I tend to like that too. But as you can see, you're only as good of a DevOps engineer as how much you know about how the software engineers put the code together, right? That's why typically I don't believe in these certificate programs that will take you from nothing, from basically as an English major, and make you a DevOps specialist, because there's just no way. You need us, even if you had an amazing ability to think in systems from the get go, just this intuition, you still need to know all of the stuff that goes into it in order to deploy it, right? And so that's why we spend so much time, even, you know, really get into that. And if you go into enterprise or stay in enterprise kind of IT in doing this, chances are you're going to be using a significant number of systems where you're really only doing coding a fraction of the time, and basically to paste piece, you know, cut and paste pieces together, where you're really more configuring large um, deployed systems, but most of your effort is actually in deployment, actually, booting up your appliances, booting up, VMs, things like that, configuring systems and running configurations, things like that. So that's what you end up finding when you're in that. The coding you do very little of unless you're in a innovation team or startup, or new business venture sort of thing. That's of course what we like to do, but it's also where you get most of the experience or to do the best job in the deployment. Those are the most valuable people you find in enterprise, are the ones that have actually done or at least been exposed to, not even done, just exposed to, like in this case, the actual boot up from scratch. Be amazed at how many engineers have never actually software engineers have never actually booted anything up from scratch before. So you get a lot of experience in just watching that. All right. Any
I
questions?
have a, yeah, I have a question on the
Sure.
day. So the first thing is like Sumo just generated. I think that's a glitch with Sumo. So it is negative value, or sometimes
Yep.
um, it repeats. Some of the vehicles are not moving. I'm not really bothered about that. So Justin explained me that's from Sumo on that day, but it takes 1 minute for each data that get updated onto the front end. So if you look at the difference between each and every data that's been updated, each is 1 minute. So it's a long latency.
Hmm.
It seems excessive.
Yeah,
One minute seems very excessive.
yeah,
I'm really surprised by that. 1 minute, because I know we talked a little bit about that on Slack
yeah,
or Eve,
yeah.
and I'd expect 1 to 2 seconds maybe
Hmm.
at the worst, but not 1 to 2 minutes. I mean that's
That's something to
crazy.
do with my network here, or but because it's a 1 minute is like equally. I can send the picture later.
Yeah, I mean 1 minute is like a lifetime in computing, right?
Yeah.
I mean even 1 second you could argue is too long, in some cases. So um, I wonder if that droplet has a performance issue, JC. I seriously doubt it. I mean, that's a
Oh,
pretty standard Docker deployment. I wonder if, um, I mean, I guess it's possible, Areve, that your internet is slow, but not that slow. I mean, things would be timing out before you see a minute. I mean, your sockets would be timing out.
Yeah.
The I could see where like the round robin aspect, like if your computer's running really slow, I could see where Sumo would run really slow. When you watch Sumo, how
Mhm.
long does it take for it to simulate a
One
step?
minute. 1 minute. That's what the
How
one
long
minute.
does it
So
take Sumo to simulate
two
one?
more to take on. Yeah, generate each data one
Oh,
minute.
all right.
Yeah.
That's not the cloud issue. That's Sumo.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, yeah. That wouldn't be a cloud. Well, I'll take that back. It's possible that it's possible that it takes a really significantly long time to post the data
Yeah.
to the cloud.
Hmm.
Did you do any timing? Like, did you write any timing or like console log or like print any kind of thing to see if the time where the time was being taken, if the time was actually being taken in the post to the cloud, or if it was just
So
instant?
I didn't try that, but what I did is like we have a timer set on the vehicle.py, right? So zero point 0.5, that's simulation speed.
Right.
I just commented that out and see if any make any changes, but no change at all.
That should at least make a half second change.
Yeah.
Although if you're waiting a minute, yeah, I don't know. I mean, when we log in to um, Yeah, I mean, when we log in and stuff to the droplet, it's fast, right?
Okay, you tried at the end, right? It was fine. Maybe something wrong with my system then.
Well, no, I want to get
Well,
to the bottom of it.
I mean, one thing we didn't show last Thursday was actually posting this data. So we could update some of our client code and test it out.
You want to try it?
Sure, I can take the ball.
Go for it,
That,
Jake.
that wouldn't be a promise problem, would it? Like it wouldn't be a problem that it's not taking it because it's waiting for something rather than when you put the await and
It's a good thought, but probably not since we're using Python, which isn't inherently async on Sumo side. But I mean, that is one of the things you would consider, like, oh, maybe the promise actually isn't being fulfilled or something, and we're like leaving the socket open, just in how that's implemented, but not on Sumo because yeah, Python is not inherently async. You have to make Python async. You have to be very intentional about it, and we definitely didn't do that in the embedded vehicle.py.
All right, everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we actually ran this last week, the client side. I think what we need to update here is going to be the vehicle embedded side, which you've already done, right?
I did.
All right. So if anybody recalls our base URL for the API, which I'll just say API base URL here, should be HTTPS. I think it's API dot what fullstack se.com. Does that sound right? We should be able to.
yep.
All right. So that's our base API base URL. What we got to do is come down here and replace it. All right. Let's see. I think there's one more. So we're going to use the Lorem Ipsum account. Let me sign in on that account so we can see it. What's Lorem? And this what's Lorem Ipsum 123. So how many vehicles we got? Looks like we got 7 so far.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't look like there's any data available right now.
But one thing I'll mention is that this is moving pretty fast, right? I mean, just open up a network tag, JC. Let's just make sure that like the droplet isn't, let's just this. So like take you through some debug steps here, right? Like figuring out what the deal is. Let's see if there's a slowness to this. Oh, interesting. We're seeing something there. It looks like there's a looks like it's the MQTT is being rejected.
Is there anything we're seeing on the console?
Why don't you refresh on the console? I think you opened it too late.
So how do you determine that? So what is this window is all about?
Okay. So the way I knew that it was having an MQTT issue is you can see go back to your network tab, JC. You'll notice see how it's reconnecting over and over. Well, that's a WebSocket. It should only have to connect once, right, and stay open. But the thing about WebSockets, it's exceptionally robust of a protocol. It's why we use it. And so it will, if it fails, it'll try to reconnect because that's kind of the point of the WebSocket is part of the specification, the RFC specification of WebSocket is to reconnect when a connection gets disrupted. So it will continually try because it's designed to be robust. to losing connections or whatever. But the fact is that it shouldn't be reconnecting like that frequently, right? So there's something else wrong with that. Whether maybe it's an auth issue, which is what I would guess first. I think it's an authentication issue, honestly, first. But then it's also possible that there's a redirect issue or something. The thing is, JC, I was able to use MQTT box to connect because we did verify that.
Yeah, and I should have the token here. Here, we'll verify it real quick as well.
I'm connected right now here.
You're connected right now?
Password, yeah.
All right.
Oh, well, I didn't do it with a token. Why don't we verify with a token? I'm doing it with the gateway username and password, so maybe there's an auth issue.
One thing I'd like to see are the logs for MQTT.
Yeah, so we're gonna check the logs there.
Hey, I'm seeing rejects. You see that?
Yeah. So there's an auth issue going on. So it was something we missed on deployment on Thursday. Now, Ariv, is that really slowing it down? That's probably why, actually. You're probably seeing a really slowdown, and now I'm surprised that it was able to update, honestly. But you know,
So why would it have, because we went through this in deployment and you were able to go through. So is it the authentication with the passwords that you made for each one of us?
well,
Or is it in the original one?
no, I think so. What we did in class on Thursday was we used the gateways authorization stuff, which is just hard coded, right? It's just a hard coded username and password. In fact, it's like gateway dash username and gateway dash password. Whereas what we just checked and what this specific user does is to what you just said, Beth Ann, and it does use the UID and the token to try to check. So it uses a completely different authentication mechanism, which we didn't verify that it worked in class just because we didn't have time. And I was, of course, afraid of this, so I didn't want to open up a rat's, and I didn't want to go down this rat hole during class. But yeah, so maybe we can search this out right now.
Great office hours thing, though.
Yeah, right. Just kick it down the road, and I knew that JC could take care of it during office hours.
That's the way to do it.
That's right.
All right. If you guys remember that the JWT token was the password for user logging into MQTT, and then that the UID we want is actually the user UID for the username.
So he's just picking these off of the front end API tokens and stuff like that. So yeah, it looks like there's an authentication issue.
But I still get the data though. How that is?
That's what's weird. If it's getting the data, that's pretty strange.
It could be doing a request via REST.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm wondering if it's doing a request via REST every so often and getting the latest data. Because I think we did put that in there. In fact, yeah, we did on an interval. Oh yeah, there's also remember before we did it, we had an interval that would check with the REST route. I think we left that interval in there, but it's a slow interval because I think I upped the interval, but we use MQTT in order to get a faster, real-time response. So that's probably how it's updating.
I'm gonna actually log out for a moment.
Um,
Is somebody trying to log in? Looks like 2DC right here.
yeah,
So
is that you, Arif?
no, I didn't log in.
No, do you have is someone trying to hit the,
You want me to log in?
no, but I'm wondering if someone has their browser open or something, because we're seeing the log. Someone's hitting that server.
Let me check. I'm sure it's not me.
Not me.
Me.
It's Shwetha?
No, not me.
Not me.
No, JC, I broker that through to 80, not 1886 for WSS, and you don't want to use self-signed cert, you want to use an auto cert. Okay, you don't want to use a self-signed cert. CA signed. There you go.
So I kept as an auto login. Is that why?
Well, it's going to continue to try. So if your browser is open, it's going to continue to try to hit that route, right?
But the
'Cause-
browser was not open though. So, but I kept it like remember password thing.
okay, yeah, it'll keep trying to hit that. JC, remember how you created user accounts in there? Does wait in your
You want to see who this is here?
yeah.
Yeah, 1 second.
But I also want to see, maybe we didn't update the user authentication for the MQTT auth routes to check that specific vehicle user table. Because the
It doesn't need to check that yet because right now the auth is only for connecting to MQTT.
okay, we don't have authorization for specific.
Right.
Okay. So that should work. We know that the auth is semi-working because generally it's because it works with the gateway credentials. Let me pull up the code here for. Actually, I have it open. Hey JC, can you look at the logs on the gateway?
Well, so real quick, I think this UID belongs to Shwetha. Shwetha, if you're online, do you happen to have the front end open?
Oh, yeah, I have the front. No.
Oh, so it is you, Shwetha. You were so determined that it wasn't you.
I don't have the browser open, but I have my VS Code, just the code open. So will that matter?
No.
Well, so this
No.
user UID does belong to Shwetha. So, and then there's another one here I'm seeing, CEF, and I think Arif, that one's yours.
Yeah, I just opened and closed right now. I told you, right? So
I don't have.
So Shwetha,
It could be just buried in a tab. If there's any browser on your machine open anywhere that's, it would be trying to connect with this UID.
okay, I just opened it again now. Is that just want to check?
Yeah, yours is the CFA, so it's getting rejected as well.
Okay. I'm logging out right now.
If we look at the MQTT broker in this authentication file, you'll see the username's what gets logged here on the reject, and then it'll send rejected here, right?
Yeah.
Now go back, JC. If you look at the gateway logs, I bet we're not hitting the right route. I think, yeah, I don't think we're hitting the right route. I think that's my fault.
But I'm just curious how we are getting the data still.
Sorry, can you elaborate on that?
So on the day, I could able to get the data, flowing without a problem, just except for the 1 minute gap.
I think it has to do with that interval. We're hitting the rest route also to get data, which is fine. The rest route works. It's MQTT that's not, but you're doing it on a slow basis. The rest route is happening on the slow basis. I suppose MQTT, which is real time.
I see. Oh.
Yeah, you see this latest data route that's getting hit, so that's grabbing the latest data for those vehicles.
Okay.
Yeah. Here you go. All right,
So honestly, you know what seems to be happening? I'm not even seeing a 400 for.
Bad gateway.
that's what
I'm not even seeing a 401, which is what we should see for.
It has to do with that line 27. I bet it's that gateway port with that colon. I think that colon is throwing it off. Because in dev,
here's something.
In dev, you need.
Well, here's something that's. Let me clarify here. Look at the logs.
Yeah.
The logs say, what do they say? All right, so they do say reject.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we know that it's coming here rather than here.
Right.
And you're saying look at line 27.
Or line 9 now. You got your Vim bindings on. So the config.gateway.port, I suspect that if that's not set, you have a colon. And I bet that colon is throwing it off. Although, with that said, maybe it doesn't really make sense since the gateway works. The gateway creds work.
Well, no, but here's the thing is this, well, you can connect MQTT with, if you use the gateway credentials because you're just getting via username and password.
So I think it has to do with this route. I think that config.gateway.port, which is not set in the Docker Compose. So this is a deployment issue, actually, not a code issue. So if you remove, it's that colon right there. That's the problem. So the config.gateway.host references the deployed www.f or api.fullstackse.com. But in local dev, we do localhost :port. But in deployment, in production, we don't do that, right? We do api.fullstack.se.com without any port. And so if you hit that colon, we deploy without it, you basically are doing colon blank /user/username, which is not a valid URL. And there's a try catch wrapped around it. And I bet that that's actually what it's failing on. So if we actually if we ended up
so really what we want to do is we actually just want to combine these into one variable rather than separating port.
Yeah, we could do that.
Simplify it.
Right. That's fine. You could have also shoved the colon
In
in.
this case, it has to be localhost or ws/mqtt.fullstack.com.
The HTTP, because remember what we're doing is this gate. It's what the MQTT broker is he's hitting the gateway via REST and with the credentials in order to verify the user. Because the gateway is the holder of the data, right? And so
Yeah.
the broker has to check with the gateway via a REST route, an HTTP route, whether or not that user is allowed based on the unit and token. At which point, then he can respond, yes, it's okay. And then the client can connect to the broker via WebSockets.
Okay.
MQTT gateway host. So this is what we're going to be plugging in now, right? And this is our MQTT gateway host.
Yeah.
Right. So then, as you see, we're going to be hitting our action deployed or backend API, and then getting our user information for this particular username.
All right, so let's see what you changed. You basically just changed the local host to base URL, right? And then
Yep.
you removed the port in order to minimize that, but we still wanted to maintain the ability to do dev locally without modifying our code. So we just shoved the 9500 into the base URL as opposed to separating out the base URL and the port.
Does that make sense to everybody? What we have right here. So now if you're running locally, it'll work because it'll hit 9500 on localhost.
We just have to be very confident that we don't actually reference the port anywhere because we took that out, right? We're pretty
Right.
confident that's the case because you went and changed that.
These are the ports that MQT is actually running on.
Yeah. So that's not related to the gateway. All right, we're good. So here's the beauty of this. CI/CD, all we got to do is push this, it'll auto deploy and hopefully fix itself. All right, let's pull it up and see if you push, let's see if it's deploying, see if it's building. Oh, you're going to merge in. So what JC did was he branched off into office hours, into a branch called office hours, right? And what he's going to do is he's going to submit a merge request.
Oh, sorry. I just pushed.
To what? To master?
I just pushed directly. Sorry, guys.
So pull up, that's fine. Never mind. He pushed to master directly. Pull up Git and GitLab, and we'll see the deployment.
When I make the provision, I was saving my local file and just updated. It happens. I didn't do any Git or CI/CD.
Yeah, that's good. If you did, it would have updated it. Is it deploying, JC?
Yep.
Check that out. See, it's automatically rebuilding the Docker container, the Docker Compose, and everything, right? And then its job succeeded. So it took it down and took it back up. Let's see if it worked.
Looks like we got a front end client that's connected.
Nice. Let's go check it out. Hopefully it's a little faster for you, Reeve. It is connected. Ooh. No, that looks like it was just an initial.
There we go.
Look at that.
Connected to MQTT.
Nice. Let's push some data.
All right, now we can go back to where we were setting up this this embedded side here, right? So if you recall, we were replacing the base URL here. That way we actually go up to our deployed backend, and I'm going to run this guy. I got to start up a virtual environment. Activate it. Install everything, right? Export my Sumo home, since I'm running on Mac. This is where my Sumo install is located.
So you can import Tracy.
I'll launch a Sumo GUI, just get it primed here. The ampersand runs it in the background, so you can see here's exports. It's all prepped. All right. Let's see if we're running here. All right, so I got the initial vehicle information.
But even on that day, I could not see the vehicle moving, though. Very slow. It was, you don't even see the movement.
I said it printed the initial speed here, right?
It's same thing happened. Yeah, you get the initial speed, and every minute you'll get an update.
That's pretty slow.
Yeah.
You
know what's odd is that oh, here we go. This is what we're printing. And it looks like this post datum is taking quite a while.
Okay.
But the simulation is just totally outside our system, right? So it's supposed to run as it used to be. Like the vehicle has to move and it has to post the data, right?
Yeah, but it's blocking. Posting data is a blocking function, right? So it has to wait to post that data, and if
I
that
see. Yeah.
HTTP socket isn't done, it's got to wait.
Okay.
Because we're the ones who tell the simulation to go, right, with that simulate step.
Yeah.
That simulate step. So, but we could very easily turn this into async. So this is actually a really good teachable moment with asynchronous programming, right? Because technically we don't have to wait to post, right? We could continue on. We could queue up that data and just say post when you get to it, kind of thing. That's the beauty of asynchronous programming, right? Is that if we did this with an asynchronous programming, we could easily say, look, I don't care about awaiting the promise, just do it when you can, but go ahead and do my other stuff because it's not dependent on that, right? But we're not doing that, right? So
But in real time, the data will be will be posted regularly, right? So it won't wait for our signal.
uh, right, yeah. Although this is taking way longer than it should. So
yeah, something here is timing out, and I've got the feeling that it might be the post back to MQTT.
ah, good call. I bet it is. And I bet it has to do with the MQTT post import. There it is. See, it's the MQTT. It should be MQTTS 1885.
Are we running on?
Let me verify.
Do we have a certificate on the actual MQTT protocol? Because I know that we've done broker side termination for the certificates before to get MQTT actually with TLS.
I actually checked that. We had to do it inside of the broker. Like we had to load the certificates for MQTT into the broker rather than doing it Nginx because you need the enterprise Nginx license to do that. That's why we use hot proxy usually. Um, so in this case, I don't think we have SSL termination. Well, I don't think we have SSL for MQTT. That would work at least.
So are these loaded up here? MQTT host and MQTT port.
Check the compose file. Yeah. They are, but I'm using WebSockets, but you're prefixing with MQTT in the gateway. So that was a misstep on my part, not checking that. With that said, let me verify. You may be able to still connect via 1885 with this, but I'd have to check here.
So I think what we need to do here. This is our MQTT host, right?
Yeah, you can just change that to mqtt.fullstacksc.com and port 1885. But it won't be encrypted.
Right.
But the node library that we're using for MQTT does support WebSockets also, so you could use WebSockets if you wanted.
Well, the other option would be to actually use this host.
Yeah, but that creates circular dependencies in the Docker Compose, and then you have to do the linkages and all that kind of stuff.
Well, no, it already depends on MQTT.
Oh, it does? All right.
Yeah.
You just can't let the broker depend on the gateway then.
Right. So we're okay. Let's give this a shot.
Did anyone just follow what we just did? Sorry, there was probably a lot of back and forth jibber jabber on that.
Sort of followed what you were saying.
Okay. Well, rewatch the video, you'll get it.
Exactly. 3 or 4 times.
We'll explain it. Let's see if this worked before we try to explain this and it be wrong. I think this will work, but
So developing with localhost is a terrible idea. Yeah.
Are we going to be okay on? Let's see. The reason we didn't run into any of this before is because we actually had everything running inside on the same localhost, but now we're actually having to connect to different hosts since we containerize the different applications.
That's why deployment is so frustrating. It's these little details that get you. But they're just little details, right? We know it works. It's just a matter of tinkering and thinking through the systems aspects. Like, what are the interfaces? What are the locations of these things? If you go through these things enough, you get really good at it to the point where, it's 1 or 2 things that you overlook. But there's always something you overlook. You can almost guarantee it on initial deployment, which is why it's usually...
But it's actually helpful to watch you do this.
Usually debugging is, you do more learning and watching other people debug than you do just getting preached at. I agree.
BJ, so is there any testing protocol here that we need to do after the deployment to make sure that everything's going fine and the latest speed and all this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, typically you do what we typically do, we do spot check on production just to verify. Like, you don't run through like any integration tests or anything. You can. There is a school of thought that you run integration tests against production. I don't actually agree with that, because then you load up data into production that you don't want, because not only will it mess with your analytics, but it's actually a huge security risk, because you're actually putting test data onto a production system, and if that test data gets out in terms of credentials or anything, then your production system could potentially be neutralized. So you really want to make sure that typically you want to do a spot check. So you do really good testing in staging. That's where most of it goes. So typically, and we'll talk about this on Thursday actually in advanced deployment, but typically you'll have a dev environment that is exactly like your in the cloud, right? That's exactly the same setup as your local or as your production. So you have local, right, where you tinker and stuff and you develop. Then you push to dev. And then dev is where, it could be broken at any point. No one really cares, But then there's the next, you go to staging. And staging is exact. In fact, it has a replica set of your production data on staging. at which point you can actually run integration tests against your staging servers. And that's set up exactly the same way as your production. And then at that point, once you've verified and had acceptance by multiple parties like production, product managers, beta users, stuff like that, then you move it to production. So that way you can kind of manage that flow so that when you get to production, it's really a spot check. Like you shouldn't have to do, massive testing or anything.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yep.
Nice. There, it's faster now. So what happened? The issue is that show us the route, JC, where the post data route. So you were right, Ariv. It was taking way too long. And in fact, what we were waiting for in that 1 minute was for the socket to time out. Basically, the server to error. Now, the server errored specifically on that line 147 or 165 right there. And the reason is you got to turn off your Vim bindings for these lectures, JC. Line numbers.
I'm sorry.
So this publish MQTT, it was failing here. And the reason it was failing was because this publish MQTT is a function that we defined. So go into that publish MQTT. So if we go into that publish MQTT, you'll notice that we're trying to connect to the broker so that we can publish, the gateway can publish the latest data onto the broker so that all the clients who are subscribed to the data topic can get that data. Because remember, we don't let the clients publish to the broker, only the gateway publishes to the broker, right? So clients and embedded devices never publish directly to the broker. They always go through proxy through the gateway. And the reason we do that is for security reasons, verification reasons, all that kind of stuff. Plus, you might want to hydrate things, which you can't necessarily do. So you put them on the broker. So you can keep really consistent kind of things on the broker. And so what happened was when the vehicle was posting data, the gateway was trying to publish to the broker, but it was failing because our URL from the gateway for the MQTT broker was wrong. And that was a deployment problem. Works in on local because there's none of that weird, URL differences, but it failed here. And what it was doing was it was waiting. It was trying to connect because MQTT, remember, is a very robust protocol. So it was the same thing that was happening with our WebSockets. What the gateway was trying to do is it kept trying to connect to probably, or actually may not even gotten there. I don't really know. But what it basically was it failed, and then it hung up for a minute until the server or probably your client, forcibly closed the connection. Basically, a request library in Python. Forcibly closed the connection because it's like, it's taking way too long. I'm done. I'm moving along, and it's failing. So basically, we just weren't able to complete that request. Now, here's the beauty of it. Let's say this was in production. This would have been really bad because that means you wouldn't be getting your data, but you were getting your data because we actually inserted the document into Mongo, our database, before we tried to publish to the broker. So while it may look like it was an awful thing, you still were able to post your data. So every time you posted your data, we still saved it. So there was no actual data loss. There was just user experience. Yeah, it was more user experience loss that we were experiencing, but not a data loss. So that's actually a good teachable moment too, that if there's something important, you should probably put that first, right, in your processing. So if anything fails after it, not a big deal. The most important thing was that we got that data. Because otherwise, the vehicle, you don't really depend on your embedded systems to save and buffer a bunch of data, right? That's very expensive to do. And so you always want to do that as soon as possible. You always want to save your data as soon as possible. So if anything happens after, you still have that data. So in this case, so what were the details that we actually changed? Well, go to your Docker Compose, JC. Basically what was wrong was before what we had, what did I do in class? I think I put like the WebSockets or something URL there.
Yeah, it was like WSS and then the actual WebSocket URL there.
Right. But the problem was I wasn't thinking. I didn't go check to see how JC had actually implemented the publish MQTT. So go back to the publish MQTT thing, JC. So if you notice there on his line 8, see that MQTT, he had already prefixed with MQTT, but I was forcing yet another WSS protocol in that URL. So it was an invalid protocol. What I was actually forcing because of my Docker Compose. Well, that was bad. Now you might say, all right, well, I changed the MQTT, that's fine, but what about encryption? That's not encrypted. Well, that's what JC and I were going back and forth about really quick. Was that actually it is encrypted because it's all going to be local. Because if you think about it from a deployment perspective, we have a Docker Compose where our broker and our gateway are actually linked on the same machine. They're just within the Docker Compose. And so there's actually self-signed certificates that Docker's supporting between the two. But regardless, does that really matter? No, they're on the same machine. What are the chances of a man in the middle happening on the same machine? You got more serious problems if that's the case, right? Someone's in your machine that's on root access in order to get your Docker networking. You got really bad problems, more so than an encrypted, non-encrypted connection between those two. Now, if your broker was somewhere else on someone else's infrastructure, that would be very important to have that encrypted because you have to go over the internet. We're not going over the internet. It's all still local host actually on our VM, on our virtual machine, on our droplet. And so from that perspective, we can go back to our Docker Compose, JC, and we can look. So instead of actually putting a URL, we put MQTT. Now, why did we put MQTT? Well, we put MQTT because if we go up, that's the name, right, of our service, of our MQTT service, our internal Docker service. So that it actually proxies the name, the localhost name of the Docker network, specifically that IP address. It's just an alias for the basically the Docker network IP for the MQTT service.
And it's just like we did with Redis, for example. If you look in here on the insert document for lib database, when we come down here and we set up our Redis client, our host is Redis.
Yep. Same thing with the MySQL, right? You do -h MySQL.
Yep, right
MySQL
there.
is just an alias for the 127.0.0.1, or more accurately, the Docker network, whatever IP is Docker assigns to it at runtime. So
all the communication between these containers, you don't have to worry about getting out on the wider interwebs.
yeah. So go back, review this office hours video. It'll come together.
So when you do this in a production environment, do you hand over like an interface kind of document that says, here's the route or here's the URLs that you need to include for the DevOps, whoever's deploying it, if it's someone not within your local team?
Yeah, exactly. You typically have you should have some very sophisticated documentation. Typically, we do everything in Git. So we do a bunch of markdown documents. We have formats that we'll use and stuff. Typically, what I found is most of our clients hire us for the full stack. So we typically don't have to do really significant things. The worst that we'll have to do is maybe interface with a front end team, which at that point is really easy. It's kind of like, here's the back end URL, like have at it. When you're talking about like massive deployment stuff, it's pretty rare that we would be working with a separate team. Now, as our enterprise projects age, and they mature, typically you'll see IT departments starting to take over a lot of the deployment stuff because that's natural. Like we want that to happen. We want their IT departments to basically just manage it because then it's maintenance. So typically from that perspective, you just have a big document that you give them. Like here's how it works. These are the things that are listed, and it reads more like a novel than anything. And it's up to them to really learn it and verify it and go in and check the configs and all this kind of stuff. There is not a standard thing in the industry that I know of. I'm sure someone's come up with a standard. I mean, there's standards everywhere, but not one that you typically will see commonplace. We'll talk about this more on Thursday, but there's tools like called Helm and things like with Kubernetes that are provide more readable sort of configurations that are a lot more clear. But if you think about it, if I handed you that Docker Compose and you were familiar with what Docker Compose did, that's basically self-documenting in a sense, right? Because you can see, like, click on that Docker Compose, JC. That Docker Compose, you can go through, all right, here's the services, MQTT app. All right, what are the environment variables? Well, if we've named our environment variables correctly, we can see, well, the MQTT gateway host is that. And then if we go down to app, we can see that it depends on that, and the MQTT host is MQTT, so we reference that. So they're somewhat self-documenting, in theory.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I was kind of just curious on the. Well, once you create it, the initial one, you can kind of do the read through, but.
Yeah, but typically we'll create a narrative too. Now, whether people actually read our narratives, probably not, but we put them together anyways, because they should be reading them. But I don't know, it's more of a CYA, cover your ass, than anything. It's like, here. And then if they come back and start pointing fingers at you, like, oh, this is your fault, your deployment, which happens guaranteed every time, you'll just say, it's in the narrative, should have read it. That's why we do that. Yeah, your worst, your most lethal weapon against finger pointing, which will happen, especially in DevOps. Your most lethal weapon that you can use is to say, well, it's in the documentation that I wrote. Because no one is ever actually going to read your documentation. That's not what happens. I don't read documentation. Why should anyone else? But I can always, if anyone tries to accuse me of not doing something well or not communicating effectively, I can say it's in the documentation. Even if it's not, because they still won't go and check. But it'll shut them up. So it works that way. So there's a little trick of the trade.
Then you quickly write it into the documentation someplace.
That's why we put everything on Markdown, so that you can do a really quick git push. It's like it's there. No one's ever going to check the commit history. That's way too much work. Yep. Good point, Beth Ann. All right, so we debugged that. It actually works now. So Reeve, your system should be relatively it should have a little hop to it now.
Yeah, it's faster. Yeah, get the data right away.
It will.
Did it work, Arif?
Yeah.
Sumo is slow. Like, that's just the nature of the game. But it shouldn't be a minute slow.
All the data are updated at the same time. Just 7 minutes ago, all the data got updated. So.
Oh, perfect.
Earlier, 1 minute now lag between all the cars. Now it's all at the same time.
Which you'd expect. I'll challenge you, Arif. Make that async, or thread it. Make a thread.
Okay.
Because every loop does not depend on it posting, right?
Yeah.
Set it and forget it kind of thing. So technically, you could do that. That would be a pretty powerful thing.
So was that interval time something you guys set, or was that an automatic thing?
No, that's something we set. In fact, that's how I think JC did it originally in his first front end, and I just didn't remove it all when I put MQTT in. Are you talking about the timeout or the interval?
The timeout.
Oh, the timeout. The timeout is built into TCP, the specifically HTTP, and it varies depending on browser. And I don't know who specifically closed it. It's very possible that our MQTT library that we're using, the gateway, actually timed out. Like it has a retry count, so it retried a certain number of times and then said, I'm done. I suspect what actually happened was it was a combo of things. I bet it failed, tried to send a 500 back, didn't quite do it, and then left the client hanging. And I bet it had to wait to then forcibly close the socket. So I think there was a little combo kind of action, which resulted in this excessively long wait time in posting data. That was a good debug, though. That was I'm glad we were able to fix it relatively efficiently. But yeah, that was good. But now we're in full deployment. I think we officially did it. Sweet. Any other questions? Yeah, speaking of finger pointing, I'm dealing with a Slack with one of our large enterprise clients. They're trying to finger point, and I literally just slacked them. I said, read the documentation, it's in there.
But you're not furiously updating Git right now. What's going on? Is it actually there?
Oh, that is actually there. It's been there for like 5 years now, so yes. That is actually there, and I tend to say it about once a month. That's the other thing. Like, I'm sure I didn't do it the first time, but I made sure it got in there 5 years ago, and now I just keep pointing to it. That's what happens when you get new people every month. You have to keep retraining them. Gotta love your enterprise clients.
They should be good at training them. Lots of practice.
That's why we do boot camps now. I find it much easier to train someone well once than it is to train a bunch of people half-assed over a number of weeks.
I remember there was a technical leader back when I was working at Ford. I worked with, and he would mentor a lot of fresh engineers. He was a really great mentor, but it got to the point, obviously, it took up a bunch of his time. And I remember he told me, he's like, yeah, I got to the point where if I ever heard a question for the second time, I'd send someone back to their cubicle, right? Even if it was a different person who asked it, and then I would write a document, right? I would write a tutorial on how to do such a thing, and I would send them that. That way, the third time it came to me, I could just send a link.
Exactly. Exactly. A wise man. That's how it works. That's how it works. I
think we all strive to be that way, right? Where you're just that efficient and you're so well put together that you could actually do that.
You'll get there. I mean, a lot of you could do it in your fields right now, right? You just may not be in a position to do it, but like in this, I mean, you get there with this stuff. A lot of this is just learning the tools. Conceptually, I mean, the stuff is relatively straightforward conceptually, I think, for engineers. It's just systems, right? But it's really just learning the tools and kind of the details. But as soon as you get a handle on those things, and it clicks, it'll come together fast.
All right, I'll see you guys on Thursday.
Cool.
All right. Have a good night.
Thanks. Have a good one.
See you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.